Corruption have turned the spotlight on the governing party of South Africa, the ANC. The party has this internal structure to protect its ethics and reputation, but the Integrity Commission has been called toothless. Recently, the Director of Accountability Now wrote an opinion piece for the Daily Maverick saying it was time for the Integrity Commission to bare its fangs. We're joined by Paul Hoffmann and Senior Research Fellow at think tank Trade Collective, Lebohang Pheko. Tonight, thank you both for being with me. The opening salvo to both of you, let's start with you, Paul, is that there are high-ranking ANC officials with serious claims hanging over their heads, but they have not been found guilty in a court of law. And we know part of the strategy of those allegedly involved in state capture was possibly to undermine law enforcement, or at least use it not for fair and impartial justice, which now affects the chances of prosecution. In light of that, where does the ANC's Integrity Commission fit in?
Yes, thank you, Francis. Good evening to your viewers and to my co-panelists as well. I think that the starting point with the Internal Integrity Commission of the ANC has absolutely nothing to do with proving crime beyond a reasonable doubt, as is the case in a criminal trial when a person is accused of breaking the law in that way. What the Integrity Commission was created to do was to protect the reputation of the ANC. The way that it does it is that matters that are referred to it by the top leadership of the ANC, including the NEC, that's its National Executive Committee, are looked at from the point of view of, is there immorality or unethical conduct, and does it possibly impact negatively on the reputation of the ANC? So you can see that that kind of mandate does not require criminal conduct. It does not require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In fact, all it requires is the possibility of reputational damage to the ANC because of the way that a member of the ANC in good standing has conducted himself or herself.
Yeah.
Once you get to that point, you realize that this isn't a body that is a quasi-criminal court. It's not at all.
You're saying that the scope of this commission is actually very broad. Lebohang, what do you think? How much teeth does it actually have if it wants to censure a member of the ANC? What has to happen for someone to be booted out of the party? Has anyone ever been booted out of the ANC?
So, I mean, the card is basically there's a letter that sets out, I think that was addressed by Secretary General Ace Magashule last week, which basically states that all cadres that are named in corruption, including those who are named at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, have to be listed and report themselves to the Integrity Commission, and that those who don't have acceptable explanation should voluntarily step down or summarily be suspended. And then it also mentions developing a system of lifestyle audits for all ANC leaders and public representatives, declaration of financial interest, then a policy on ANC leaders and family members doing business with government. And I think that most people who are listening and viewing in South Africa and ourselves are aware that there's not much that's new in any of this. And when you ask about whether this actually has teeth, I think the notion of voluntarily stepping down is incredibly difficult because it doesn't incentivize anybody who has been accused of wrongdoing or who even is still conducting themselves in a way that is improper and brings the party into disrepute. It provides no incentive for them to voluntarily move aside. And when we speak about, when this speaks about to be summarily suspended, how often has that done? And you ask a good question. Very few people have been dismissed from the ANC, especially at high level. And I think one of the last really visible cases, high-level cases that we can probably recall would have been Julius Malema and Floyd Chivambu many years ago. And then others would be low-level, people who are not so much who don't have a national footprint, people, the local councillors here and there, and so forth. But the interesting thing about is that the ANC constitution itself, the latest iteration, which was ratified at Maverick, says that engaging in any unethical or immoral conduct which detracts from the character, values, and integrity of the ANC, as may be determined by this, by the Integrity Commission in question, it speaks of the consequences, and that there might be disciplinary proceedings involved in institutions. So the machinery is there, Francis and my co-panelists and the viewers, but I don't think that the will has been there for cadres to hold each other account. So it's not so much a case of are there the teeth, is there the bite is really the question.
Well, Advocate Paul Hoffmann, what do you mean when you say the Integrity Commission should bare its fangs? How can it do that? Later we'll talk about some of the names you've mentioned that are so problematic, still being part of the ANC. But how should it bare its fangs?
The way that it is set up to work is to determine whether there is possibility of the conduct of the person put on the carpet bringing the ANC into disrepute, which is not something that is difficult to prove, does not involve evidence of criminality necessarily. Obviously, credible evidence of criminality would be pretty decisive of bringing the ANC into disrepute. So once the committee has found that somebody is guilty of possibly bringing the ANC into disrepute, then it reports back to the NEC. And the NEC has the power to suspend on a precautionary basis the person concerned if that person won't stand down, and it has the power to discipline the misbehaving member in the same way as Julius Malema and Floyd Shibambu were disciplined by the ANC and eventually expelled from the ANC after due process ran its course. And those are the teeth that the Integrity Commission tends not to use. It has the power to say to the top decision-making body of the ANC, so-and-so is possibly bringing the organization into disrepute, ought to be suspended pending the outcome of criminal proceedings, ought to be disciplined because of the unethical or immoral behavior, ought to be put on trial in a disciplinary proceeding of the ANC. This is about protecting the integrity of the ANC as a modern political party that respects the Constitution and upholds the rule of law.
Yeah.
If the ANC is seen as a den of thieves, a bunch of COVID tenderpreneurs, crooks and fraudsters, then obviously its reputation is being harmed, and that is what the Integrity Commission is there to guard against. And it can't do it unless it bears the fangs that it has. It doesn't have the power to kick people out of the party. That is done through the disciplinary process, not through the integrity process.
Okay,
the integrity process is a much lower standard than the disciplinary.
The ANC often uses people not being convicted, but let's look at the previous history. How does a convict like Tony Yengeni not only stay in the party, but he currently heads up the crime and corruption desk at Lethuli House? Paul?
That's utterly bizarre. He has no business being there. He was convicted of fraud. In the piece that you referred to, I've quoted from the judgment of the court. He very purposefully sought to cover up the fraud that he had perpetrated, and he was found guilty and sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. That makes it impossible for him, or it made it impossible for him to continue as a member of parliament. But no trouble to the ANC. He was redeployed at Lethuli House, and as you say, he's now in charge of the crime and corruption desk. I mean, somebody has a sense of humor in the Thule House, because he has absolutely no business being a member. The possibility of a person such as that serving on a high-level body like the NEC, bringing the party into disrepute, is self-evident. It is utterly bizarre that the ANC persists in keeping Tony Ngeni as a member.
Yeah. Lebohang, do you agree? There's also Andile Lungisa. So in 2016, that's quite a few years ago, he hit a fellow councillor over the head with a glass jug and he was convicted. If the self-correct mechanisms of the party were working, would he be there right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should talk about principles, and I think the notion of a self-correcting movement, a self-correcting organization is very problematic. It makes a number of assumptions. One, that change management is something that can be done without external pressure. It also makes the assumption that a party or a movement, like any institution, works in isolation of its membership and of a broad societal sentiment. It also makes assumptions that this is a very elitist, top-down approach to really thinking through questions of transformation and realignment. And this notion of the idea of self-correction is filled up, I've used this word constantly, with hubris and a massive amount of conceit. And it's incredibly out of touch with the sentiment on the ground. You look at Twitter, you talk to anybody, at Pick and Pay, and there's a certain sense in which really many people are disgusted and unhappy and dissatisfied with the level of double standards which the people who are supposed to be put in place to govern over the resources and the interests of this country are not subjected to the same sorts of rigorous legal processes as any other person in this country. And I think that what this illustrates as well is really a historically quite elitist approach to leadership, and a dissonance between the way in which party leadership across political formations, but very problematic when you are the incumbent party, relates to people who are on the street, the man and woman on the street. And it's very much a autocratic, feudalistic approach where there is a complete tone deafness to the sentiments that many people are expressing, which are of great unhappiness. And I think when a movement or a party says they're going to self-correct, to me it means that they don't want to be accountable. It also suggests that they think that only about 40 or 50 members of the ANC are entitled to create the atmosphere, the ambience, the character of this party, when in fact this is a party that many people, I don't know the membership numbers of late, but that at least tens of thousands of people belong to and should have vested interest in shifting the character of. And if they're expressing their unhappiness, self-correcting is really is such a tone-deaf way of addressing it.
So Lebohang, staying with you, let's look at what's going to happen this week, and I'll try and get a comment from both of you before we end. So now, the Secretary General, Ace Magashule, said he will never step down because of the claims against him. He's got to appear before the Integrity Commission. The President facing claims about how money was raised for his campaign in 2017. So even though surely this should apply to both sides, by the way, on the funding, but now you have leaders, two very strong leaders in the ANC, seemingly from different factions, both being told to appear. Is much expected to happen, or could they just appear and kind of fair and square, and they're both in the NEC, that's the only body that can take action anyway, or is this just political football?
So, I think historically what we've seen with the ANC is that they have a great capacity for self-interested protection and mutual cadreship protection. And really what has also happened in the past is that these do become, just become a chess game of different commissions, different committees, and a game of great attrition where we actually lose track as the public and as potential voters and as those who are members of the ANC lose track of what has actually been the genesis of the issue, where there's a protractedness in not only the conversation and the processes, but also a long lapse between the process and the decision making, where within then there are so many intervening factors that it's actually difficult to keep track of what has actually become of an issue. Meanwhile, comrades are then being redeployed or redistributed within either party levels or to different levels of government, to different state-owned enterprises and so forth. So it does become difficult to keep track of what has become of and to track what has actually become of an issue. And that means that the public accountability is also then weakened. The notion that some members are more important than others or less accountable than others is really the antithesis of a democratic movement and of democratic governance. It is absolutely embedded in the same kind of elitist hubris and conceit that I've been talking about. And I don't think that it augurs very well for a future, not at the ballot box, and certainly not for a party that wants to see itself continuously as being the liberators, which of course is, in and of itself is extremely problematic, because being a liberating movement, one of many, I have to add, does not certainly give any organization the right to loot the very fruits of that liberation.
All right, Paul Hoffmann, I was hoping to give you a final word, but we've run out of time. Perhaps we can speak after. This queue of officials, as it's being called, has appeared before the Integrity Commission. Will it bear its teeth? Let's see what happens in the next week or so. Thank you very much both for that discussion. That was the Director of Accountability Now, Paul Hoffmann, and a Senior Research Fellow at Trade Collective, Lebohang Pheko.